Late in the evening, a strike operation unfolded near the railway corridor on the outskirts of Kyiv, where Ukrainian forces targeted a Russian ammunition supply train and a nearby depot recently replenished with Iran-supplied munitions. According to operational accounts from the battlefield, the attack began at approximately 22:30 local time. Ukrainian operators launched a coordinated swarm of 12 attack drones aimed at the moving train and the rail infrastructure supporting it. The strike took place minutes after Russian forces had reportedly finished refilling an ammunition stockpile in the area, turning the rail junction and surrounding depot into a key logistical target. The attack began when the drone formation activated simultaneously. 48 small motors powered up at once, sending the swarm forward toward the rail corridor. Russian radar systems detected the electromagnetic spike almost immediately. The signal appeared as a sudden surge of activity across monitoring screens, triggering alarm protocols. Ground scouts confirmed incoming aerial objects seconds later, prompting Russian defensive units to activate artillery and armored support. Within moments, a Russian artillery battery deployed 152mm guns in response to the approaching drones. Several shells were fired into the night sky as defensive fire. Each artillery round, valued at approximately $250,000 according to available military cost estimates, detonated in bright flashes above the area. Shock waves from the explosions rolled across nearby fields and infrastructure. The blasts rattled structures and flattened vegetation in the surrounding countryside. At a nearby rail checkpoint, a BTR-82A armored personnel carrier moved into position to support the defense. The vehicle's turret rotated toward the approaching swarm, and the gunner opened fire with a 30mm automatic cannon. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness as the vehicle attempted to intercept the drones. Empty shell casings struck the vehicle's steel surfaces, while continuous bursts of cannon fire attempted to track the incoming targets. The drones responded by dispersing their formation. Instead of maintaining a single path, the swarm split into multiple maneuvering groups. 4 drones climbed to higher altitude, 4 descended toward ground level, and another 4 changed direction laterally while continuing toward the rail corridor. The maneuver pattern complicated the work of defensive targeting systems. Russian fire continued upward, but the rapidly shifting flight paths made accurate prediction difficult. Some of the drones switched to manual control and flew at extremely low altitude, moving between buildings, fences, and trees along the route. One drone reportedly passed through a cluster of trees with leaves brushing its frame, while another dropped behind a farm structure seconds before cannon fire struck the roof above it. From the perspective of Russian gunners on the ground, the small aerial vehicles moved unpredictably, weaving through the landscape and forcing constant adjustments in firing angles. Commands over Russian radio communications directed defenders to adjust lead angles, increase burst length, and shift elevation. However, the delay between radar tracking, fire control calculations, and the moment of firing limited the effectiveness of those corrections. By the time a firing solution was established, the drones had already changed course. The intensity of defensive fire gradually slowed as ammunition was expended. Smoke drifted across the checkpoint area. In that pause, defenders recognized that the exchange had not stopped the approaching swarm. Instead, the confrontation confirmed that the attack was underway and continuing toward its objective. At the same time, inside a Ukrainian control bunker located some distance from the battlefield, operators monitored the engagement through thermal imaging and telemetry feeds. Their screens displayed vehicles, personnel, and infrastructure as bright heat signatures against the dark landscape. Operators adjusted drone flight paths in real time, recalculating angles and timing with each new data input. According to operational data visible in the control center, Russian units were repositioning along the railway. Air defense elements moved toward the tracks, while a mechanized infantry platoon spread out into a defensive firing line, preparing what appeared to be an ambush against the approaching drones. Shortly afterward, small arms fire began from positions along the corridor. Tracer rounds crossed fields and rooftops, creating a defensive barrier intended to force the drones higher into open air. The drones responded by dropping lower and following the contours of the terrain. Several flew just above rooftops and irrigation channels, using buildings and landscape features as cover. While ground forces concentrated on these low-altitude drones, a separate group of aircraft at higher altitude prepared a different task. Their thermite payloads were armed as the ground engagement intensified. Operators monitored the timing carefully. According to mission telemetry, the attack was no longer limited to reconnaissance or harassment. It was shifting toward a strike on the railway itself. Moments later, Several drones descended and released thermite charges directly onto the rail line. White-hot flares erupted on contact with the steel track. The intense chemical burn rapidly heated the metal until sections of the rail began to glow and deform. Within seconds, the steel structure sagged and warped under the heat. Russian infantry near the line reacted quickly, attempting to reposition as the rail began to fail. Orders were shouted across the position while gunfire continued. However, the ambush formation had already lost its tactical purpose. The rail infrastructure supporting the train had been compromised. In the Ukrainian bunker, confirmation signals appeared across the operator's displays as the rail damage was detected by sensors and visual feeds. The mission profile shifted again. What had begun as reconnaissance and disruption was now evolving into a broader operation aimed at the entire supply train moving through the corridor. As the situation escalated, both sides prepared for the next phase of the confrontation around the damaged rail line and the ammunition transport moving along it. As the operation progressed along the damaged rail corridor near Kyiv, the confrontation expanded beyond the initial drone engagement. Russian electronic warfare units moved to counter the swarm, deploying specialized equipment designed to disrupt remote control signals and satellite communications. Among the systems activated was the R-330 Zhidel Electronic Warfare Complex, a mobile platform equipped with antennas and emitters intended to interfere with drone navigation and communication frequencies. The vehicle, valued at roughly $10 million according to open military procurement estimates, deployed its antenna array and began transmitting powerful jamming signals across the area. Within seconds of activation, large portions of the radio spectrum were saturated with interference. The electronic disruption extended across a radius estimated at up to 30 kilometers, creating an environment in which radio-controlled aircraft could lose contact with their operators. Inside the Ukrainian command bunker, operators observed the immediate effects on their monitoring systems. Several drone video feeds abruptly disappeared as backup radio links were overwhelmed by electronic noise. The loss occurred because some fiber optic control lines had already been severed earlier during the engagement, forcing those aircraft to rely on radio communications that were now disrupted. However, not all aircraft were affected. According to telemetry visible to Ukrainian operators, 9 drones remained connected through intact fiber optic control cables. These physical links allowed data transmission without reliance on radio frequencies, enabling continued navigation despite the electronic warfare environment. The surviving control streams appeared stable on command screens as the drones continued moving toward the rail junction. Meanwhile, Russian air defense units intensified their response. A Pantsir S-1 air defense system was activated near the rail line to engage the remaining drones. The system, equipped with radar-guided targeting and twin 30mm autocannons, is designed to intercept aircraft and missiles traveling at high speed. In this case, the system targeted small unmanned aerial vehicles approaching at relatively low altitude. The Pantsir's cannons began firing rapidly, sending streams of tungsten shells into the air. Several rounds detonated as programmed airbursts, scattering fragments intended to destroy incoming drones. During the first moments of firing, Russian defenders achieved partial success. One drone was destroyed mid-air in a flash visible on infrared monitoring systems, while another was damaged and fell into nearby trees trailing smoke. For a brief period, Russian defensive forces appeared to regain control of the situation. However, battlefield conditions soon changed again. Smoke produced by burning thermite along the damaged rail line drifted across the area, reducing visibility for optical sensors and targeting systems. As the smoke spread, the Pantsir's tracking system struggled to maintain clear visual confirmation of low-altitude drones moving through the haze. When the system's sensors recalibrated after the smoke interference, several of the drones were no longer visible on the targeting displays. At ground level, Russian combat engineers moved toward the warped rail sections in an effort to restore the track and prevent further disruption of the train's movement. Teams carrying cutting equipment and toolkits began working to remove damaged metal segments, while sparks from acetylene torches lit the area. During this repair effort, the situation escalated again when Ukrainian reconnaissance personnel operating near the tree line opened fire on the engineering teams. According to battlefield reports, short bursts were fired from suppressed rifles. The muzzle flashes were minimal, but the gunfire forced the engineers to take cover behind rail cars and equipment. Russian personnel returned fire with AK-series rifles, and a brief firefight developed around the rail site. At the same time, Russian Special Forces units advanced towards suspected Ukrainian control positions. Their movement was reportedly guided by artillery triangulation signals intended to identify the location of drone command infrastructure. The troops moved through the area quickly, advancing through fog and smoke toward bunker positions believed to house the operators controlling the drones. Inside the Ukrainian bunker network, operators prepared for a possible close engagement. Control posts were positioned roughly 500 meters apart as part of a redundancy system intended to reduce vulnerability to artillery strikes. According to operational planning data, a standard lethal radius from a 152mm artillery shell could reach approximately 150 meters, meaning multiple separated positions increased the likelihood that at least one command unit would remain operational during bombardment. Backup systems were activated as the confrontation intensified. Secondary radios, spare power supplies, and pre-programmed drone flight paths were prepared for immediate use if communications were disrupted. Telemetry streams continued to deliver detailed information, including wind speed, train velocity, heat signatures, and searchlight movements from Russian defensive units. Operators repeatedly simulated intercept scenarios, adjusting timing and approach vectors in small increments. Several drones were directed to climb to higher altitude and hold position while their thermite charges armed automatically. The payload systems used small spring-loaded mechanisms designed to release charges precisely at calculated coordinates. Below them, other drones aligned into narrow approach lanes aimed at vulnerable sections of the train. The selected targets included couplings between freight cars and fuel tanker valves that could cause large-scale damage if struck. Each flight correction was calculated in seconds, with operators compensating for the train's speed and movement along the compromised rail line. Battery indicators for several drones began to drop as the operation continued. Some aircraft displayed remaining power levels below 20%. Despite the risk, operators continued the approach. Mission planners had accounted for potential signal loss or battery depletion by designing flight paths that would allow drones to continue moving forward even if control was lost, using momentum to reach their targets. Outside the bunker, the night remained tense as both sides prepared for the decisive phase of the engagement. Russian defensive systems continued firing intermittently, while Ukrainian drones moved steadily closer to the train carrying fuel and ammunition along the rail corridor. The decisive phase of the operation occurred after prolonged defensive fire and electronic warfare attempts failed to fully neutralize the approaching drones. According to monitoring data from Ukrainian operators, a short vulnerability window opened in the Russian air defense coverage when the Pantsir S-1 system's cannons reached thermal limits after sustained firing. During that interval, several remaining drones accelerated their final approach toward the target area along the railway. 7 drones entered a descending attack sequence, moving through dense smoke and debris produced by earlier thermite burns and defensive fire. Some of the aircraft were still connected through fiber optic control lines that extended back toward the Ukrainian command bunker, while others were operating on limited battery reserves after losing communication links earlier in the engagement. The drones approached the train in staggered intervals of several seconds. Their primary target zone consisted of a long chain of freight cars carrying fuel and ammunition. According to battlefield observation feeds, the train extended roughly 2 kilometers along the open rail line. The first drone struck the coupling between 2 freight cars. Its warhead detonated on contact, tearing through the metal connection point and sending fragments outward. Moments later, a second drone impacted a fuel valve assembly on one of the tanker cars. The strike released a large quantity of diesel fuel, which ignited almost immediately after exposure to sparks and heat from nearby explosions. A third drone struck another structural point along the train, damaging a hinge mechanism on a freight car. As the explosions occurred in rapid sequence, the already weakened rail line began to buckle further under the pressure and heat. Monitoring systems inside the Ukrainian bunker recorded intense pressure waves and signal interference as multiple detonations occurred within a short time frame. Operators reported that camera feeds became partially obscured by smoke, fire, and electronic noise. Some thermal sensors overloaded due to extreme heat signatures from burning fuel and ammunition. Despite the loss of clear visual confirmation, telemetry data indicated that the drones had reached their intended target zone during the brief vulnerability window. Within minutes, sections of the train began to derail as damaged couplings failed and the compromised rail infrastructure collapsed. Several freight cars overturned along the track, while others remained upright but engulfed in flames. Ammunition stored within the train cars began detonating intermittently, producing repeated secondary explosions across the rail corridor. By the time the immediate sequence of impacts ended, approximately 40 train cars had been forced off the track. Fires spread across the wreckage as fuel continued to burn. Military analysts later estimated that the destroyed cargo and damaged equipment represented losses exceeding $120 million. The drones used in the operation were valued at less than $50,000 in total, according to cost estimates cited in operational reports. The destruction of the train effectively disabled the single rail line supplying a Russian military formation operating in the region. Logistics analysts described the strike as a disruption to a critical supply route that transported ammunition, fuel, and other materials necessary for ongoing operations. However, the consequences extended beyond the immediate battlefield. The explosions and fires caused damage to nearby civilian infrastructure. Power lines running along the rail corridor were severed, leading to electricity outages in surrounding villages. Water supply systems were also affected after pipelines near the rail line were damaged during the blasts. Emergency services moved into the area during the night and early morning hours following the strike. Local residents reported darkness across several communities as power outages spread through the region. Emergency responders established temporary assistance points to distribute drinking water and basic supplies. One local school building was converted into a temporary shelter where displaced residents gathered while authorities assessed structural damage to nearby homes. Chalkboards in classrooms were reportedly repurposed to organize ration distribution and emergency schedules. Humanitarian teams began delivering food, medical supplies, and bottled water as part of the initial relief effort. Preliminary estimates suggested that the cost of civilian recovery and infrastructure repairs could reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Repair crews began evaluating damaged electrical lines, rail infrastructure, and water systems once the immediate danger from burning ammunition subsided. Military observers noted that the strike illustrated the growing role of relatively inexpensive unmanned systems in modern warfare. The operation combined real-time data analysis, electronic warfare resilience, and precision targeting of logistical infrastructure. Analysts emphasized that the use of fiber-optic-controlled drones allowed operators to maintain command of several aircraft even during heavy radio frequency jamming. At the same time, the attack raised questions about the broader impact of such operations on nearby civilian areas. While the destruction of the train significantly disrupted a military supply route, the resulting explosions also affected surrounding communities located along the corridor. By early morning, fires were still burning along parts of the derailed train. Occasional detonations continued as remaining ammunition cooked off within damaged cars. Emergency teams maintained safety perimeters around the wreckage while investigators began documenting the scale of the destruction. Residents in nearby villages continued to cope with the aftermath of the blast through the night and into the following day. Aid workers and local authorities coordinated relief measures while engineers assessed the damage to infrastructure and transportation routes. The strike near Kyiv therefore marked both a significant logistical disruption in the ongoing conflict and a reminder of the